Okay, so there's a new government notification that just dropped, and it's a big deal if you're importing certain chemicals into India. If that sounds like you, then you're definitely going to want to stick around for this.
So let me ask you a direct question. Are you currently bringing in toluene diisocyanate, or TDI, from the European Union or from Saudi Arabia? If the answer is yes, you really need to listen up for the next couple of minutes. Because here's the bottom line, plain and simple. A key trade rule has just been extended, which means you now have to pay a pretty significant anti-dumping duty on these imports. And this isn't temporary, it's for the next 5 years.
Right. Let's break down what this is all about. The government of India has decided to continue an anti-dumping duty on TDI. It's a move designed to protect the domestic industry, and it's something you need to understand inside and out.
So let's get right down to the nitty-gritty. The product we're talking about is toluene diisocyanate, specifically the 8020 grade. You'll find it under the HS code 29291020. And this duty? It only applies to imports that originate from the European Union and Saudi Arabia. The whole reason for this, officially, is to shield the Indian industry from what's known as dumping. And like I said, this is locked in for a full 5 years.
Now, you've heard me say the term a few times, but what exactly is an anti-dumping duty? Let's cut through the legal jargon and translate this into something that actually makes sense.
This is what the official notification looks like. Yeah, it's pretty dense, full of legal speak. But don't worry about all that. The core idea behind all this text is actually really straightforward once you break it down.
In simple terms, think of an anti-dumping duty as an extra tax. It gets slapped on imported goods when a foreign company sells them in India for less than what they charge in their own home market. Why do this? Well, the goal is to level the playing field and stop local Indian manufacturers from being unfairly undercut.
So let's talk about how the money works, because this is crucial. First, remember, this is an additional tax. It goes on top of your normal customs duty. The rate itself is set in US dollars per metric ton, but you'll be paying it in Indian rupees. And here's a critical detail for your accounting. The exchange rate isn't a moving target. It gets locked in on the date you file your bill of entry. That's super important for planning your costs accurately.
All right, let's get into the real specifics. This duty isn't a flat rate for everyone. The exact amount you're going to pay depends entirely on who actually produced the TDI you're importing.
Okay, for imports coming from the European Union, you can see the rates are all over the place. If you're buying from Covestro Deutschland, you're looking at about $221 per metric ton. But look at Borsochem, they're way lower, just over $102. Now, pay close attention to that last row. If your supplier is any other producer in the EU who isn't named on this list, that duty jumps way up to almost $265. That's the catch-all rate. And it's the exact same story for Saudi Arabia. If you're importing from the big-name Sadara Chemical Company, your rate is about $217. But if you're buying from any other producer in Saudi Arabia, whoa, that rate skyrockets to over $344 per ton. You can see how knowing your exact producer is absolutely essential for getting your costs right.
Okay, so we've seen the tables, but what does this actually look like when the rubber hits the road? Let's walk through a few real-world examples so you can see exactly how to calculate this extra cost.
Let's start with a really simple one. Say you're importing 10 metric tons of TDI from Covestro in the EU. First step, you look up their specific rate on the table. It's $221.04. Then you just multiply it by your 10 tons, and there you have it. Your total anti-dumping duty comes to $2,210.40. Simple as that.
So what happens if you're buying from a smaller supplier in the EU that's not specifically on the list? Let's say you bring in 5 tons. Well, in that case, you have to use that much higher any other producer rate, the $264.96. Your total duty ends up being over $1,300, which is a much bigger hit on a per-ton basis.
Let's try a bigger shipment, this time from Saudi Arabia. You're importing 20 metric tons from Sadara Chemical. You look up the rate, $217.55, and do the math. Your total anti-dumping duty on that shipment is going to be $4,351.
Now, this next point is absolutely critical. You have to get this right. The rule is very clear. The duty is based on the country of origin, not the shipping route.
So let's look at a scenario that some might think is a clever loophole, but it isn't. Say the goods are made in the EU, but instead of shipping them directly to India, they're sent to Singapore first and then exported to India from there. Does that work? Nope. Not a chance. The duty still applies because it all comes down to the country of origin. That EU producer's duty rate will be levied no matter what path the shipment took to get here.
So, we've gone through the rates, the calculations, the tricky bits. Let's wrap this up with the most important part. Who's safe from this duty and who really needs to start making some changes right now?
The good news is there are a couple of clear exemptions. This duty will not apply to you if you're importing a grade of TDI that is not the 80-20 ratio. It also won't apply if your product is coming from any country that isn't the European Union or Saudi Arabia. So, if you're sourcing from somewhere else, you're in the clear on this one.
And who needs to be on high alert? Well, pretty much anyone involved in this supply chain. We're talking chemical importers, obviously, manufacturers who use TDI, like in the foam and polyurethane industries, the customs brokers who are clearing these goods, and maybe most importantly, the costing and pricing teams who have to make sure the numbers add up.
At the end of the day, it all boils down to this one simple fact. This duty directly increases your landed cost of goods. There's no way around it.
And that really brings us to the final question you need to ask yourself. This isn't just some random piece of news, it's a direct hit to your bottom line. You need to be looking at your suppliers, your purchase orders, your spreadsheets right now. So I'll leave you with this. Is your landed cost calculation up to date? Because if it isn't, it's already wrong.